Day 54. I know it's been a while. I'm still reading Reader Come Home by Marian Wolf, page 196. I'm not even sure about the page, but I should reread this page. So, unexpected contemporary example of the powerful nature of this dimension in the reading act surprised me just a little while ago. The philosopher Bernard Stiegler, director of the Institute de Research d'Innovation at the Pompidou Museum in Paris, invited me to present my research at a conference. It was a nerve-wracking event for me that ended with a dinner afterward, attended by no fewer than 15 men and myself. Regrettably, both the only non-French speaker and the only female. Seated next to Professor Stiegler, and determined not to betray my shyness in the situation, I grasped at conversational straws that asked him how he had come to be a philosopher. After a slight but notable pause, he said, "In prison." After an equally slight pause, one that I hoped would convey my attempt at politeness, I asked the impossible to repress question, "But why?" To which he replied, "Armed robbery. I was in prison quite a few years." Oh man. I blurted out the most immediate hypothesis. "You were political. Part of the French Red Brigade." That was the beginning of the dialogue that Professor Stiegler and I began about what happens in the life of a person who is imprisoned, in this case both for conscience and for crime. Not unlike what Nelson Mandela related in Long Walk to Freedom, or Malcolm X in his autobiography. Stiegler read first for escape from his prison reality, and then for what became an almost insatiable desire to learn. He discovered philosophy from books that a group of volunteers managed to bring him weekly, similar to the selfless work by the Reader organization in Great Britain. By his last year in prison, he was reading 10 to 12 hours a day with what he described as a contentment and joy unparalleled in his life, either before or after. The rest of the story is the stuff of Parisian legend. The eminent French philosopher Jacques Derrida asked to meet Stiegler upon his release. After their meeting, Stiegler re-entered the university, completed his dissertation with Derrida, and became one of the most thought-provoking, albeit controversial philosophers in France. His life work became a series of efforts to give new perspective to how humans can live meaningful lives in a technological culture. Elaborated elsewhere, his advocative concept of pharmacon, a remedy that contains a poison with a therapeutic virtue, has helped to sharpen my own perspective on technology's complex contributions to society. But it was not only his difficult dialectical contributions to the modern thought that I left Paris with, but rather his living example of the contributions that reading makes, both to sustaining the self across adversity and to redirecting thoughts beyond the self to the good of others. Time for social good. It's actually a quote by Jonathan Franzen. "We are so distracted by and engulfed by the technologies we've created, and by the constant barrage of so-called information that comes our way, that more than ever to immerse yourself in an involving book seems socially useful. The place of stillness that you have to go to write, but also to read seriously, is the point where you can actually make responsible decisions, where you can actually engage productively with an otherwise scary and unmanageable world. Bonhoeffer and Stigler, are two examples of human beings in whom the third reading life supports the self through otherwise impossible circumstances and becomes the basis of emulable service to others. The place of stillness that Jonathan Franzen describes is the reflective domain in which the act of reading allows us to think critically for ourselves and to make responsible decisions, which in the process become socially useful acts. In a recent essay about our values as a nation, Marilyn Robinson wrote, "I do believe that we stand at threshold, as Bonhoeffer did, and that the example of his life obliged me to speak about the gravity of our historical moment, as I see it, in the knowledge that no society is at any time immune to moral catastrophe. We owe it to him to acknowledge a bitter lesson he learned before us, that these challenges can be understood too late." We lived in a historical hinge moment, as Robert Darnton called it, en route to whole new forms of communication, cognition, and choices that are ultimately deeply ethical. Unlike during other great transitions, we have the science, the technology, and the ethical imagination necessary to understand the challenges we face before it is too late, if we choose to do so. As depicted earlier, we need to confront the reality that when bombarded with too many options, our default can be to rely on information that places few demands upon thinking. More and more of us would then think we know something based on information whose sources were chosen because it conforms to how and what we thought before. Thus, though we are seemingly well armed, there begins to be less and less motivation to think more deeply, much less try on views that differ from one's own. We think we know enough, that misleading mental state that lulls us into a form of passive cognitive complacency that precludes further reflection and opens wide the door for others to think for us. This is a long-known recipe for intellectual, social, and moral neglect that the fraying of societal order. At stake here is the ultimate message of this book, that any version of the digital chain hypothesis, strong or weak, poses threats to the use of our most reflective capacities if we remain unaware of this potential with profound implications for the future of a democratic society. The atrophy and gradual disuse of our analytical and reflective capacities as individuals are the worst enemy of a truly democratic society, for whatever reason, in whatever medium, in whatever age. Okay, I should stop here. Thanks so much. Please correct me if you can. Bye.